Hello and welcome to episode 11 of the Swimrun Show podcast. We're going to crack right on with a very special guest, Stuart McInnes. He founded the first swimrun race in Scotland in 2015 with Loch Lomond, which was 57 kilometres. Went on to launch Hell's Hot Swimrun in the Outer Hebrides. It was a classic scenario of jumping off a sailing boat to start with into rough seas. Wild adventures, and which don't take place anymore, unfortunately. But we'll hear all about that in the chat. Stuart is actually the CEO of the xTriWorldTour, which is extreme triathlon. The guys behind Norseman and Celtman, which Stuart founded in 2012, and it was great to learn myself about the similarities between extreme triathlon and swimrun. There's quite a few of them. It was a really enjoyable chat with Stuart. So here we go. Let's crack on. Stuart McInnes, founder of the first swimrun races in Scotland. So we have Stuart McInnes over in, I think you're in Norway, Stuart. How are you getting on there?
I'm in Sweden, actually, just to confuse the issue completely. Yes.
Okay. I was just looking at your Norseman posters there, and Celtman, I see at the back.
Yes. I have fingers in different countries, but I'm currently in Sweden at this point.
Yeah, good stuff. So Stuart, I've been tasked, as I kind of mentioned earlier, with writing a history of swimrun in the UK, and Scotland played a big part in the early days. So Stuart's one of the guys who brought it to Scotland, swimrun, and I never made it to any of the Scottish races, unfortunately. I was signed up for one of them during the COVID years, but that didn't happen in the end. But How did you get into organising a swimrun in Scotland?
Well, we organised the Celtman Extreme Triathlon,
okay.
And I've done that since 2012 was the first one. And then living in Sweden, I've lived in Sweden for 10 years, so I was aware of the growth of swimrun here. It's a massive sport here. It's huge. Every weekend there's races all over the place, and I see them locally. I can see a lake out of my window here, and there's the swimrun in that lake.
Right.
And being organisers of an extreme sport in Celtman, excuse me, and realising there's a market for same in Scotland, it has similar topography and it has plenty of water. Let's put it that way. So we knew we could create something quite interesting. And actually, everybody was always focusing on Otelo, which is island to island in Swedish. In Scotland, that's not quite so possible. You start to look at Loch Lomond with all the islands. So we really just flipped it on its head. And thought, let's create something the opposite way around, which is where Loch to Loch came from, which is Loch to Loch, rather than island to island. And really, it just came from that. It came from a conversation, from some fun, from some love of the landscape and the knowledge of the local area, and the realisation that we could not bring the sport to Scotland, although I think we were actually the first kind of commercial race that took place.
Yeah. I think on my kind of documents I've been writing up, I've got you down as organising Loch in 2015.
Loch, correct? Yes.
Yeah.
In 2015 was the first one.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So that's hot on the heels of the inaugural Brecca Buttermere, which was I think July 2015. And then you guys, I think, was the second swimrun event in the UK.
Okay, in the same year.
The first in Scotland in the same year. Yeah. So right on the kind of cusp of swimrun over here. So that was that one. And that happened a few years on the run, didn't it? 15, 16, 17.
Yeah, we did it for 3 years. Right. And actually, I think our history with Celtman gave us an advantage because quite a lot of the athletes were crossover. I mean, the triathletes and swim runners are from the same stock. And of course, we had lots of local connections. So that made it a success immediately. But I will admit it was hard to sustain that success because people didn't really know what swimrun was and they weren't all that aware of it. And, excuse my French, it was fucking cold. So it made for a pretty unpleasant experience.
Right, yeah. Well, that's what Scotland's all about, isn't it?
That's
But
true. That's true.
what what was the longest swim on Loch? Do you remember? I know it was a long time ago. What was the longest
I
swim?
know I have to try and remember all these numbers. I know we had two distances for Loch, and the long one was 57k, including the swims. I
Oh
can't
God,
remember the exact breakdown, but I have in my mind it was somewhere around about 7k for the swims.
right, total
Yeah,
7K. Okay,
yeah,
that's
but
yeah, that's
that's from a rusty memory bank.
yeah, yeah, roughly, yeah, yeah. And in yes, Scotland is generally colder, wilder, beautiful, beautiful place, obviously, but it's generally colder and wilder, more kind of exposed than most other parts of the UK. I think probably
Yeah, yeah,
the
absolutely.
most, isn't it?
Well, it made it ideal for
Yeah,
this because it was so we did it in Loch Ness. So first of
yeah,
all, it's well known, but
yeah.
also it has lots of small loch-ins nearby.
Hmm.
So we were able to use
Yeah,
that to create a nice course, and they
yeah.
varied massively. Some were almost wading depth, and of
Mhm.
course Loch Ness is bottomless, as you know.
Yeah, yeah,
So there's a real range of depths there and
yeah,
temperatures to deal with.
yeah, yeah. So you probably was it like from 12 to 15 or something like that in the water? Or
We would say that for insurance purposes, yes.
okay,
It may have been slightly chillier in the main part of Loch Ness.
okay, yeah. Cool. So that's, I mean, it's like awesome. 57 kilometers of wild Scottish terrain and water.
Yep,
And
yep.
then
Yeah,
the one that really, I mean, I know you've got Instagram Swimrun Scotland, and there's still some of those great images up there.
yeah, I noticed that still exists. Yes, it's obviously
Yeah,
not maintained anymore, but
no, but it's great. It's a bit of history because some of the
mm.
images are brilliant. And the next year, 2016, you introduced Hell's Hop, which was,
Yes, we did. Yes,
lo-
yes. Now
how was that?
well, there's a little bit of history behind that. Apart from the bizarre coincidence that both myself and my fellow race director Paul McGreal, who's from Manchester but grew up in Devon or something like that, I don't know. Anyway, turns out we're both from Barra. Our
Oh,
families are both from Barra.
right.
Bizarrely, which means they've probably slept together at some point in the past. This is not much of a.
Yeah.
um, and he was organising an adventure race up there in the Hebrides, and we obviously started to discuss how crazy it would be, how nice it would be to do a swim run up there, and also to do it with some off the wall ideas, including a tall ship to start the race from. So we managed to find such a thing, the Lady of Avalon, and we managed to arrange that. However, history books will tell, and you can put this in your history book, that the Hebrides is slightly volatile when it comes to weather patterns. And as
Yeah.
we led up to the race, the days before the race, it was biblically bad. It was out of control. I mean, we were really going to have to cancel it. Most of the ferries were cancelled from the mainland, which is how the athletes were going to get there, and it was just absolutely nuts. But 24 hours before the race, it calmed down, and people were able to get to the island.
Right.
And then we ran the race. But as you'll see from the photographs, the swell that was left over from the storm was enormous. It was still there.
Yeah.
So it was about 4 meters swell.
Wow.
And we consulted with the athletes and we consulted with water safety, etc. And the conclusion was that the swell was moving them to the finish line of the swim. So even if they died, they would still get to where they're supposed to go.
Okay.
I'm
Yeah.
able to say this to bring humour into the risk factor now, but it was pretty scary at the time, I have to say.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, even when it's flat calm, when you're organising a race with water, you're still kind of, you know, looking at it and waiting for people to get out. When it's rough, and yeah, it's another off the scale, isn't it?
It is indeed, yeah, yes. I mean, even the ship, when we were trying to launch people from the ship, it was lurching from side to side. I mean, there's a huge, big, tall ship just leaning way over from one side to the other. It
Yeah,
was pretty crazy.
yeah. No, I've seen a few of the photos. They're great, and that ship idea, I think, is brilliant. It's I've
Yeah, and actually,
tried.
an interesting point, which you're probably about to ask me, why it was called Hell's Hop,
Oh, yeah.
um, which ultimately changed. There's an island that has a Gaelic name that sounds very like hell, which is in between Barra and Eriskay. So the original idea was to swim the sound between Barra and Eriskay and go over Hell's Hop, go over the island of Hell, effectively. But as it turned out, it's too wide, it's too open, it's too far, it's too risky. But the name stuck because it gave it a kind of edge.
Yeah. Oh, it's a great name. It's a great name. Yeah. And so that was 2016, and
Yes.
it didn't. I expect the athletes were super chuffed once they finished that.
Honestly, they had the time of their lives. I mean,
Yeah.
they'll still be talking about it. It was an incredible event. And actually, although it sounds crazy with this huge swell in the sea, the sea wasn't rough. It was just swelly. So they got a bit seasick, but they weren't really in trouble. It was just it seemed more dangerous than it was really.
Yeah. And that was that kind of 40 odd K or something like that, 50, that kind of ballpark. Or
I wrote that. I knew you'd ask me that, so I wrote it down. I can't read my own writing. Hell's Hop was 33K in total with 8.5K of swimming.
Oh wow, swim heavy. That's great. What a great course. Oh, because there's quite a few, good swimmers that some of them look for the longer kind of swim percentage.
Yes, absolutely.
That's great.
And quite a lot of scrambling onto rocks to get out of the swims and that kind of stuff. It was a really cool race.
Yeah. So 2016, it didn't happen again, I don't think. Is that?
No, we only did it once.
Right.
And the reason for that was simply the risk of cancellation. It was too high.
Yeah.
There's too much at stake if you have to bin the whole thing,
Yeah, definitely. It's well done for doing it once, because it looked awesome.
We keep talking about it. We keep saying we need to bring this back because it was also for an excuse to go back to the Outer Hebrides as well. So.
Yeah. What's with those? Because I thought about the ship model of like this escape to Alcatraz idea, or escape from Alcatraz. How many could you fit on the ship?
Not very many. I can't remember the limit. We had about 35 athletes. It was quite a small race. We probably could have taken 60.
Okay.
But they were all already dotted around all over the deck. It was quite a small space.
Yeah, and then jump. Yeah, it's just the start is amazing. So brilliant. And then, but Loch Lochy Loch, that carried on.
Loch, Goo Loch. So it's Loch to Loch, lake to lake, effectively. Yeah. But it's the Gaelic.
Goo is two. Yeah. And that had that was 2017 as well, wasn't it? 16,
we
17.
did that, 15, 16, 17, and Brecca took it over after that.
Right, okay.
But I don't think they ever actually ran it. Or maybe they ran it once, I can't remember.
Yeah. It became a Otolo merit race, didn't it?
When it was ours, it
when it was yours. Yeah.
It was, I think, year 2 and year 3, yes, because I spoke to Michael Lemmel way back in the beginning. And I was I happened to meet him in Stockholm at some do, and I said but he obviously thought, who's this nutcase from Scotland who's throwing words at me? So he made us wait a year so he could see that we weren't just completely mad before we moved into the merit race thing, because that gave us some kudos. It really did, because the Otlo's got such a good reputation.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and Alan Anderson, do you know him?
The infamous Alan Anderson, yes.
Yeah.
You can leave all of this in your podcast, because I hope he's listening.
Yeah. So for those that don't know Alan Anderson, he organised a couple of events, wasn't it? But he did Loch Lomond in Scotland, and then did one in Snowdonia, and I think he was going to do one in Mallorca at one point. Not sure that happened, but he did. True, yeah, he did Loch Lomond, didn't he? And a couple of years, maybe 2 or 3 years. And
yes, I think so.
Yeah. I think maybe Brecca did take that one on as well, and I think it did happen under Brecca in 2021, maybe. But it all in the end, the kind of where we're going is there was Scotland were kind of leading the way, and especially in some of the wild locations in the kind of 2015 to 2019, and now this 2024, there's no scheduled swimrun races I know of in the calendar for 2024.
No, and it might be a victim of its own success, if you like to put it like that, because of the nature. I mean, we're used to organising the Celtman. Now, the Celtman to an athlete is 9 months of training, and then a week or more of travel and event, and it's a huge thing. With Swimrun, particularly in Sweden, it's a Saturday morning event. You turn up and you race and you go home again, even if it's quite long. So it's not quite so much of a destination sport. And the problem with Scotland is everywhere's miles away from everywhere else. So you can't you have to go and find accommodation, which you can't find, and all this kind of stuff. It makes it really complicated, unless you were to do something in lowland Scotland, and then it would be less interesting, less exciting.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's a balance of trying to get that wilderness experience, but also having facilities and accommodation and
Accessibility,
So I'm sure you'd be a fool to think that it won't return to Swimrun, to Scotland at some point, and it might be, as you say, in a more accessible place, I guess.
Potentially, yes, that would make sense.
Yeah. So your Celtman background, are you race director for Celtman, or how?
Yeah, race director, one of the co-organisers. Usually my colleague is the race director. Yes, but I'm one of the founders. Yeah.
Right. Brilliant. And where's the swim in that? Is that Loch Lomond, or
it's in Loch? Well, it's Loch Shieldaig actually, which is extension of Loch Torridon.
Right. Okay. And
it's a really nice swim. That actually, it's always it's very cold, so it has now a reputation for the temperature. It never. I mean, when we started the race, we would be looking at old data, old tables and things for temperature, and it was supposed to be 14, 15 degrees. We've never seen it above 12, and usually it's about 9.
Yeah. Basically, my experience of Scotland is if you take water temperature that kind of expect, or someone might say, and we take like 25% off that number.
Yeah. That would make sense. Yes. Yeah.
But it is a beautiful place and very special. So how did you find, you've got the series, the xTriWorldTour there with all over the world?
Yes.
20 odd countries, is it?
Well, we have it in 13 countries, but we have 20 races because some of them have a half distance as well. So
okay. So what's
the
full,
same location?
What's a full xTri distance?
Well, it's similar to Ironman. So
right.
it's in theory it's 3.8k, 180k and 42k, but it does vary because we don't stipulate that you have to do it exactly. Depends on the nature and the course and all that kind of stuff. They're approximately that.
Yeah, so there's definitely you kind of you're working with nature and the distances in nature, a bit like Swimrun as opposed to
correct. Yeah. We don't make the courses artificial. We won't add an extra out and back for distance or something like that. It just becomes slightly shorter or longer.
Yeah. Well, I can see why you got involved in Swimrun, because what you're doing there at xTri is very similar, isn't it? Apart from the bike, but the same kind of mentality.
It's exactly the same, and that's precisely why we did it. It's the same. You've hit the nail on the head. Really, it's the same mentality, which is slightly west or east of normal. I'm not sure.
Yeah. So, how did you find the pandemic affecting your events?
Well, it shut all of them down, of course. It's because nobody could travel and nobody could get to them. So, we created quite a lot of virtual stuff, which people did. Everyone has home trainers and all that kind of thing. So, we also created a system where we would encourage people to do one of our virtual events, but don't do it inside, because not everybody was locked in a cell. They could go outside. So, depending on where you were, we encouraged them to do any kind of sport and report it as distance. And it just kept the community alive.
Yeah.
But 2020 we had one event. We had one event in Montenegro, and the reason we were able to run that is because they had amongst all of the strange rules of COVID, one of them in Montenegro was that in a national park, no rules apply. So you could take your mask off and you could walk in, and everything was normal in the national park. So we did run the event that year, and it was a cool event, and it also, people had all sorts of strange journeys to get there because there weren't very many flights, and all the borders were tough. I actually drove there from Sweden. So I drove through 7 countries. It took me 35 hours. Argued with a few customs guys, but got there.
Yeah, well done. I bet that was a journey. Yeah.
It was good fun.
Yeah, good stuff. And are you kind of back into full swing now with all the events?
Absolutely, we're completely back into full swing. Yeah, we did lose a couple of events due to the pandemic. So we had one in Morocco which didn't ever get off the ground. Mainly because the organisers were involved in the hospitality industry. They had hotels and things, and they just lost too much money, so they couldn't put the thing together. But other than that, no, we're really growing again this year, so it's nice to see.
Yeah, brilliant. And you've Celtman. I've been aware of Celtman for a long time, and Norseman. Everyone, I mean, if you're kind of half involved in triathlon, you've heard of Norseman. Is that the World Championship course?
That's what we call the World Championship. Yeah. Yeah,
Right.
correct.
And is that kind of
Mainly because it has such a high demand and so many people apply to get it. We now have a qualification system through our races that allow you to get to Norseman. It's kind of whether or not you see it as a competitive world championships, and maybe only a few people do, a small percentage are actually aiming to win it. Everyone else is just trying to get there to do it.
Yeah.
So that's really what our system is for, to help people get there.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think you had some kind of partnership with Otelo on like sharing participants or something with Norseman and the world champs.
Yeah, I think it was the previous CEO of Norseman and the Otelo organisers were good pals, and they were collaborating on different ideas. I don't know if there was anything written into a contract at any point, but it was a friendly arrangement.
Yeah, yeah,
because of the similarities, of course.
yeah, yeah. And do you think you'd ever organise a swim run again?
I don't know. It's not off the cards. I mean, this is
Okay.
there's kind of not any time anymore with this stuff. But as I said, we do between our Scottish friends, we have talked about it a number of times, particularly the Hellshop idea, because if we did it, it would have to be special. We wouldn't do one in the Pentlands.
Yeah, yeah. What's your background, Stuart? Like, former triathlete or?
No, I'm not really an athlete, and so we have to be careful with that, because I noticed that not that I'd put myself in the same bracket, but the new CEO of Ironman apparently has never done a triathlon, and he was getting hammered for it.
Okay.
I'm not sure why it makes any difference, but no, I did own a triathlon store in Edinburgh for many years.
Right.
And we started to create events for our customer base, trail running and small triathlons and that kind of stuff. So that's where the evolution came from.
Okay.
From business.
Yeah. And you founded xTri with someone else?
Along with Norseman and Swissman. So the three original xTri races effectively are the founders and owners of xTriWorldTour.
Right. Okay. And that was, what was that, like 15 years ago? Or?
Well, the xTri as a company, 2017 we started that.
Okay.
But Norseman started over 20 years ago, Celtman 12 and Swissman 11. It was 1 year behind. So and then for a while we had this kind of gentleman's agreement. We called it all xTri, and the three races were like a little circuit. So lots of people tried to do all three of them.
Yeah. Okay. So that kind of timeline, it's quite similar to Swimrun in the fact that Otelo, the original, started in 2006. So I suppose Norseman was somewhere around that
2003
period.
it was, yeah.
Was it? Okay. So
yeah,
it's not too far off, is it, on the kind of timeline? But I guess with you guys, because it's like triathlons are massive sports, you've automatically got people understood what your event was. It was a triathlon that's a lot harder, more height gain potentially, off-road running, swims might be.
Yeah, and a lot of it's adventure as well. A lot of it's about the location and to get there and all the rest of it. And we know that if we were to sit down and speak to a stony-faced accountant, he would say you've got this all wrong, because the model we have where you need to bring a support runner and a support driver effectively, it does reduce the number of athletes who are available to come, because it's more expensive, it's more difficult, you need more time and more resources and more people. We could simplify it, but it would remove, as with Swimrun, there's many things about it that are quite unique that you wouldn't want to change, because you remove the soul from it.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't realize. So you have to bring, each participant has a support person.
Correct. Yes. Yes, they do. Yeah.
So only on the bike and the run sections, I guess.
Yeah, on the bike. So they have a support car that doesn't follow them, but is accessible to them on the bike section. And then on the run, usually there's a section in the run. In fact, always we have a section in the run where you need a support runner. But originally it was designed because of the safety aspect. So if you use Celtman, for example, you have to have someone go over the mountain with you. And that's simply because of safety. Brilliant. It's such a dangerous remote place. And as you know, Scottish mountains can bite you in the arse with a second's notice.
Yeah. Yeah.
So having that extra backup. And also it creates a massive amount of camaraderie and friendliness and just, without using the horrible old cliche, making memories.
Yeah. No,
totally. It really does.
Yeah. It's so similar to Swimrun, and I didn't realise that. So it is kind of almost like that team element. Obviously,
it's almost like the team, correct? Yes, and we have the same problem that Swimrun has, in that quite often people, they lose a support runner before the race because he gets sick or she gets sick or whatever. And so they're always having to find a new partner, which doesn't matter generally lower down the field. But if you're competitive, you need that partner needs to be able to keep up with you.
Yeah. Interesting.
We've seen that problem before, I'm sure.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. It's actually got me kind of excited about cycling, which
I'll sign you up in a second, no problem.
Yeah, I'll have a look. So yeah. So I've just come back from the National Outdoor Expo with a few organisers, swimrun organisers, and we're looking at different ways to make increase participation, awareness, and all that kind of shenanigans.
Yep.
And with your sports, the extreme triathlon, I guess you'd call it. Are you outside of like World Triathlon and British Triathlon and all that?
Well, it's interesting because there's not a defined link. Most of our races are sanctioned by the local triathlon association. So in the different countries they are sanctioned so that they're legal and they're properly insured and everything else. But some of them are not. Some of them do all that independently, and we don't demand that they do so. So effectively, our rule book is the World Triathlon rule book with exceptions, because in some cases you wouldn't be allowed to run the race under the normal rules, like water temperature, for example. It would be outside the scale of normality. So we work with World Triathlon. We have close connections with them, but we don't. We're not part of that mainstream, if you like.
Okay. Interesting. So, do you have many of like the ex-pros or current pro triathlete or Ironman people entering?
Occasionally, but they do it. They'd have to do it for fun because we don't have prize money. I mean, that's one of the things we've never had. The Norseman started off, you get the black shirt, and it's the same with all of our races. If you win or you're last, you get the same T-shirt, and that's the prize.
Yeah.
So the pros, if they need money to exist, which most people do, then they tend not to come. But some of them will come to Norseman because it's kind of a cool thing to have on their CV.
Yeah.
Particularly if they can do well.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I've won Norseman.
Well, the risk is, of course, that they don't win it because it's quite different from normal triathlon. So you have to get the trail running shoes on.
Yeah. So, what would you say, Norseman? Or I know it's a difficult one to say. Would you say Norseman's the hardest race across the series?
I don't think it is. I mean, we know from it's definitely got the most amount of history, the biggest following, many of the coolest kind of components of the race, jumping off the ferry into the fjord in the darkness and then finishing on top of Gaustatoppen. But we can tell simply from average race times that Norseman is not the hardest race that we have on the circuit.
Okay.
But it's not really about that. And in fact, a few of our races have often put on their slogans, the world's hardest triathlon. And I always say, get rid of that because really it doesn't matter. It's very difficult to prove. And we're not competing against each other to be harder than anyone else. The races are just difficult by definition. Yeah. And if you finish them, you're an incredible athlete.
Yeah.
However hard it is.
Yeah, exactly. And conditions can alter all of those claims.
Absolutely. Yeah. The weather can just change it massively. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was just looking at your website and you've got something called the SP5 race.
Yeah, that's solo 0.5. So that's our half distance races, which is something we avoided doing for a long time because having a half distance theoretically undermines the extreme element. So when we developed the half distance races, they're deliberately called solo because we remove all the support from them. You don't get any support. And also they're probably 3/4 as hard as a full distance, even though they're shorter.
Mm-hmm.
So the one in Scotland, for example, uses the Black na Ba as part of the cycle course, which is just a hell of a hill. And probably, if you were to do the maths on the numbers and everything else, you'd find that it's harder to do that cycle leg than it is on the main race.
Right. Okay. So SP5.
So they have to be tough. That's what it means.
Okay. And when you say you remove the support, does that mean there's no aid stations at all?
Well, no. I mean, yes and no. Our original plan with that was to go really raw and to tell people where they could find a tap or a stream, But actually, that would be a little bit unfair. So we have limited aid stations on these races, but they have no external support at all, which they obviously are used to in the xTris.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. That sounds like a D of E expedition.
It's
Where can you
tough, but
find
it's
the
still good
tap?
fun.
Yeah. No,
You find the
no, it
tap,
sounds
yeah.
great. And I was looking at, so I mean, your stuff is also, your website's great. I was looking at X Out. Now, that's an
Yes.
eliminator by the sounds of it.
Yeah, that's a brand new thing, and it is an experiment. That's actually in 2 weeks. We're just running up to doing that now. So it's in Montenegro. You'll see the picture from the website there with the island. So it starts on that island, and then it's it's an elimination format, but it's also an incredibly hard race. So the elimination thing is kind of just an extra to make it more exciting for TV viewers. Because one problem we have, and you'll be the same with Swimrun, trying to get it to a mass audience or get it to a wider audience is difficult because it would be a boring thing to watch. A race that takes somebody 16 hours. I mean, which parts of it do you broadcast? The bit when they're puking or the bit when they're crying, or which what you're going to choose?
Yeah.
So X-Out is designed to take all of the good stuff from xTriWorldTour and concentrate it into this really short, dynamic, exciting race. And we'll film it. Now it's not going out live, but we'll film it and we'll edit it, and it will be broadcast worldwide. We have a distribution deal for that.
Oh,
And the idea is to kind of show people what extreme triathlon is.
that sounds
But,
great.
by removing all the fluff.
Yeah. So is it, just explain the distances on that eliminator, and is it looped? Is it laps?
No, it's not looped. No, it's again, the whole point is to make it like xTri, so it's point to point. So
Okay.
it is a journey. The athletes will be taken by boat to the start. It's a 1.7k swim, 39k bike, but with about 2,000 meters of climbing in that 39k, so it's really tough. And then the run is only 9k, but you go from the finish line of the bike, which is about 900 meters, back to sea level, and then you do a vertical K to finish it.
Oh, ouch.
So it's really, really hard.
And in terms of the elimination, do you have to get to a point in a certain time? And if you don't, you're
At the
out.
transition points, we'll do it by percentage of athletes. So we have an executor, we call them, which I keep finding when we use advertising on Facebook, it blocks the adverts because they think they think I'm some sort of mad killer.
Yeah. Okay.
No, we have a character effectively who will be there to take care of the executions, but actually, because it's a concept and because people are traveling to get there, etc., they don't actually get eliminated. They can still continue in the race, but they're not in the broadcastable part of the race, so they become a back marker effectively. They can still finish.
Okay.
For fairness.
Yeah. And the broadcast deal, is it going to be? What channels will we be able to watch that on?
Well, it's a whole host. It's actually done through a company who have a contract with international sports channels, and they have to provide a number of programs per year. So we're one of those programs. So it goes out on 50 or 60 networks across the world. Things like Trans World Sport and Eurosport in different countries and blah, blah, blah. There's a whole host of them.
Cool. Oh, well, I look forward to that, watching that one.
So hopefully it gets a bit of an audience, because that's the point behind it. And it is an experiment.
Yeah. And that seems to be kind of one of near the top of the agendas now with sports, trying to get sponsorship, of course. The T100 are doing that in triathlon, and probably it's a big deal. And you've got your championship points. So each race, but going back to your normal race series,
yes.
You get so many points. Does everyone get a point? How does the point system work in your?
Yeah, the points is they're effectively participation points. So we don't base it on your level of ability. It's a finisher number. So you get finisher points for finishing race effectively, and the points vary based on the popularity of our races. So it's designed to get people to, because we know that all of our races are amazing. I'm going to say that with sheer arrogance. But some are less popular than others for whatever reason. Maybe it's the location or people don't understand it, whatever. So the smaller races, you get more points for finishing.
Okay. And
actually, in the first year of the system, which was we've just done, 2023, you didn't need to do more than one race to be able to get to Norseman. So it worked for the early adopters. It was a really beneficial system.
Okay. And so now you've got your points. You've done however many races. What's your capacity at Norseman for participants?
250.
Okay. So you've
It's
got to
not
be in
very
the top.
many, and they still, and only 100 of them come from the point system.
Okay.
The rest come from qualifications, and also from they still have their lottery, so you can still apply as anyone and go into the lottery.
Okay. Okay, cool. Oh, it sounds great. Half tempted.
Good.
Is
Half is the start.
yes, you'll probably hate this question because it can be annoying to race organisers. But I'm going to ask: is there a relay option?
No, there isn't.
Okay.
There isn't, and it's not because we don't like relays, but again the same reason that we took ages to get to the half distance. You're undermining the extreme element. I mean, the point is to get to the finish line, and I know again the accountant would say do a relay, and we'd sell hundreds of places. I know that.
Yeah.
Don't care.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of that's kind of happened with Swimrun. There are actually good arguments to have solo races in Swimrun, but the team race will always be, I think, well, for me, the best way to take part in a Swimrun, unless it's really short. But the kind of the way where it's come from, a bit like yourselves, it's come from that adventure.
Also safety, I believe, wasn't it? I mean, when you were out in the archipelago in Stockholm, you don't want to be on your own. Really.
No, you wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to do that course on my own for sure. So yeah, but the accountants think obviously solo Swimrun is a great thing, and it does get people into the sport, I suppose. And we're starting from a smaller. At least you had your triathletes and Ironmen kind of there, understanding.
Yeah, they existed already. Yes, that's true. That's true. Although technically they are the swim runners, aren't they? They just because they can leave their bike at home as well. It makes it easier for them.
Yeah. Maybe we should collaborate with your participants again.
We can talk off the recording and we can figure it
out. Good stuff. So you've got Montenegro in 2 weeks. That's the
X out. Yes,
that's the X out,
correct.
and we'll look forward to watching the footage. And when's Norseman? Is that July or August?
It's August. It's always the first weekend in August. So this year, I think that's the third. It's early on.
First week. And whereabouts in Norway is that? Is that
Eidfjord?
Okay.
Which is west of, slightly north and west of Oslo. It's about 5 hours drive from Oslo, so it's quite far west.
Okay, cool. And we'll look out for that. Have you had any kind of media companies looking to do footage from that? Because that.
Norseman always gets lots of coverage. Yes, it does. There's many films out there and TV. There's always TV companies. This year there's a Norwegian national TV crew who are making a series of films leading up to, I think 10 actually.
Oh wow!
And then a big one for the race as well.
Okay, cool.
It's a pretty famous race, Norseman, nowadays.
Yeah, no, I've heard a lot. I've got friends who've done it, and I've always been in the back of my mind sounds like an awesome race. And then there's Rockman, the Swimrun Rockman, which has a similar kind of vibe, I guess.
It does, exactly right. And actually, the guy who runs that, Thor, is he's been in our circle for many years. I think he came to the first Celtman or the second Celtman as his first ever triathlon.
Oh, wow.
And he's kind of never left us. He's aiming for 10, so he's not far away.
Okay, so your ranking system for the xTri World Series, or is it World Series or World
Tour? xTri World Tour.
World Tour. It's it sounds simpler than the Otolo one used to be. So you get points for finishing, and
yes, you do. Yeah. It's not the Otolo one. Well, I did my degree and I did my PhD in it, but I still don't understand it. No, actually, ours is not a ranking at all. The only way there's a ranking could be thought of as ranking is that we have a list of people you can see publicly with their points in order of their points, and so they're ranked. But they're not. It's not based on their ability. So everybody who finishes the race gets the same number of points, okay. And it's simply. I mean, you could call them loyalty points if you like. They're actually participation points, but it might be a better way to look at the system if you thought of it as loyalty points.
Yeah. Okay. And that, I guess that makes sense because we're looking at it with the UK races now, like setting up a ranking system for the races in the UK. But the range of distance. There's like the shortest is 5K, and then there's up to, I think the longest is probably 45K ish, from memory. But they're also different. And there's urban ones, there's flat ones, there's mountains, there's
I know it becomes hugely complicated, doesn't it? I mean, what we did, of course, because we're not ranking, we simply gave a fixed number to the race. So depending on, and we have, to make it slightly complicated, we have different tiers of races, but that's based on how popular they are. So the less popular ones, you get more points. But then we also have a different number for the short distances. So all the short distances, irrespective of where they are, you get the same number of points for finishing those races. The long ones, again, there's 3 options, 100, 150, 200, depending on the popularity of the race. Everybody gets the same.
Okay. So that could be something maybe we do with the tiers, based on, probably not based on popularity, but based on difficulty in terms of height gain, distance.
Yes, you can have all sorts of parameters. Yeah, I mean, purely we did it to try and improve the attendance at some of our smaller races, because it seems less fair that everyone wants to go to Norway and fewer people want to go to Slovakia or Montenegro, which is just as cool.
Yeah. And probably cheaper.
And a lot cheaper. The beer particularly.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, yeah. Good stuff. Okay, so that I mean, it's nice to have, I guess if you finish one of your races, you've athletically, I guess you've got cut-offs. Yeah.
We do have cut-offs. They're quite generous because we want people to finish. And one of the reasons for that is not because we're soft, but because any one of those athletes has spent 9+ months training for that race, has spent X number of thousands of pounds to get there. And if we cut them off because of some arbitrary number that we invented, it's completely unfair. So the cut-offs are based purely on safety.
Yeah.
The swim cut-off is based on the time we know that you're starting to get hypothermic because you've been in that water too long, for example.
Yeah. And I think that's true in a lot of, the swim runs that have cut-offs. It is always about safety. Often
or darkness, perhaps.
Dark.
But that's again a safety issue. So
yeah. So anyone who completes your distance within the safety cut-offs, it is a fine achievement, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes. And we always say this to, I think we said it in our film last year at Celtman, but actually the person who finishes last is always the most celebrated. And I know that's not unique to xTri, but in some cases it can be 20 or 21 hours, something like that. But the race directors will still be on the finish line to celebrate the finish, and it's a great achievement. Even though they're 10 hours after the first guy, but still, that's the way it is.
Yeah. And a big factor of that, when I've done slow mountain kind of journeys, a big factor of that being out for so many hours, like 10+ hours, is the nutrition. Compared to the guys, say for the world champs, Otelo in Sweden, the top guys, just over 7 hours. Obviously, they'll get through their nutrition. And then the back of the pack kind of going towards 14 hours, nearly double pretty much. Yeah, it's almost a different experience, isn't it?
A completely different approach, yeah. And of course, you have to consume more because it's longer. Just the way it is.
And you're colder for longer. You're moving for longer.
Everything's worse for the slow people. Everything's worse.
Yeah. So, great. Well, that's good. We'll see what happens with that in the UK. I think the Otelo guys have simplified their ranking system now, because I think there was 4 people who understood it in the whole world back in the day. But yeah.
Yes, they all worked for NASA.
So, Stuart, just going back to the swim runs in Scotland you organised, were there any standout moments you'd like to share?
Definitely the most standout for me, because we always still tease one about it. 2 of my friends, Stuart McLeod and Chris Stirling, and Chris Stirling's no longer with us, unfortunately.
Oh.
But Stuart and Chris were teammates in the first or the second Loch. And both of these guys are incredible athletes. They're also tough as nails. And you just you would never expect them ever to get into trouble anywhere on earth doing anything. But they managed to get themselves stranded at the side of Loch Ness in a position where if they hadn't been rescued, they'd still be there now. They went wrong on the course and they ended up down on this cliff face, down onto the shore. Their GPS had stopped transmitting for some reason, so we didn't know where they were. ultimately we picked them up, or somebody picked them up with binoculars, and we were able to send a rescue boat to get to them. And it's amusing because those two just took it in their stride, But Stuart himself later said to me, "You know what? I was scared," and if he was scared, then it was a serious situation.
Yeah. Wow. So that's interesting. So you had GPS on the athletes back then?
Yes, we always use GPS. Yes,
Okay,
always.
that's great.
We've used it. Yeah, no, because we developed a system for Celtman for safety, which we of course used that system for Loch. And actually, I think I'm slightly wrong about that. I think actually the reason we knew where they were was because of the GPS. It hadn't stopped working. I think that's how we were able to pick them up.
Okay.
These are old memories, and I'm an old guy.
I know. Well, yeah, yeah. I know.
So that would have come into its own then, and we still use it now. The system has evolved, and there's now a different company running it, but we still always use trackers in all of our events.
Okay, because I've used them in a couple of mine, and yeah, they are great. It's quite a peace of mind to know where the athletes are on the long distance.
Correct.
Yeah,
And also good for people watching at home. It's a little dot on the screen is quite exciting.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's become quite the likes of the Spine race and the Winter in the UK and Dragon's Back and races like that where people dot watch. It's almost a sport in itself.
Absolutely, yeah. Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, now you mentioned Chris Sterling actually, and
Yes.
and there's another athlete. There's this image that has always remained in my mind. Chris was running one of the recce's with Katja Herzmenzel.
Katja Herzmenzel, yes. In the snow up above Loch Ness. Brilliant images, aren't they?
Oh, amazing! Yeah, if you have not seen them, check out Swimrun Scotland on Instagram. And
they're still on there.
Yeah, they're still there. Yeah. I'd always remember that image because it's like a frozen tundra.
It was really amazing. Yeah. And actually, there's a few shots. I don't know if they're on that account of them actually breaking through the ice and getting into the Loch.
Yeah, right. Oh, it's brilliant. And this was before the days as everyone was kind of superimposing things on backgrounds.
Oh, there's no AI here. This was real.
This was real. Yeah. So that was great. I'll never forget that image. But okay, so there's a chance you'll bring back a swim run in Scotland.
Well, I didn't say that, and you can't quote me on that. Well, if you would be quoting me, you'd just be playing it back. The evidence is there.
Yeah. Well, it's not a definite no.
It's not a definite no. No, that's for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you and is it Paul McGreal?
Paul McGreal, yes.
Yeah. You guys a part of Dirty Events?
No, that's Paul's company. Paul owns Dirty Events. Yes.
Okay.
But Celtman is actually a separate company from Dirty Events. But Paul and I created Celtman. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Because Paul, he does a lot of the adventure racing, doesn't he, Paul?
He does, yeah, absolutely. And he organises loads of them as well.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. All right then. Well, Stuart, thank you very much. We've got a 15% chance of you organising a swimmer in Scotland, I think. Give or take a few whiskies.
Yeah, we'll see.
Okay. Well, and it's got to come back, hasn't it? It's got to come back to Scotland somehow.
Oh, it definitely has to. I mean, it's not the sport hasn't died. It's grown everywhere else. I mean, France is crazy, isn't it? They're all over it. Yeah. And Sweden still has a massive swimrun following.
Yeah.
And actually, you have to. Sweden is such a good example of why it can work in Scotland because the weather in Sweden, I can assure you, is just as shit as it is in Scotland. They might claim it's better, it isn't.
Yeah. They certainly got some extremes, haven't they? So, yeah, if it can work in Sweden, it can work in Scotland. Yeah, I like that.
For sure.
And do you think? Have you got any? Just finally, like British swimrun, I guess in the UK, and maybe there was a couple of races planned for Ireland, but they haven't actually happened as yet. But do you what would your advice be? Because you've grown a really successful series there across the world and with various partners. Would you have any advice for the swimrun organisers in the UK?
It's probably the most obvious one is don't be too ambitious with commercialism because it's a small sport, and maybe that's why some races come and go, and perhaps why Brecca didn't make it ultimately because you're not going to make lots of money out of it. unless there's a real change in direction of how the sport is done, like we've said with the accountant's advice, then it's going to be a little bit of a hobby sport, or a little bit of an extra.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. Sound advice there. And although to be fair to Brecker, they were doing great stuff, weren't they, before the pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
and they were ambitious.
And they seem to be able to make it work commercially. So maybe I'm completely wrong, but it didn't last forever, did it? So.
Yeah. No. Okay. Good Scottish advice there.
Don't spend any money.
Look for the tap.
That's right.
Okay.
But they'll make you pay for it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Stuart. That's been great. And hopefully, I might see you on a race sometime.
Hope so. Good stuff. Yes. Come along.
Man. Thank you very much. Well, that was a great chat with Stuart there. Really interesting to hear about the races several years ago in Scotland, and about the Extreme Triathlon World Tour. So yeah, thank you, Stuart. And I'm sure one way or another, swimrun racing will return to Scotland. If you do know of a race in Scotland this year, do let me know, and I will give it a shout out and make sure it's on all the relevant race calendars. So we had the National Outdoor Expo show. Thanks for the guys that came along and said hello, and all the new faces we saw. I think we motivated a few people to give it a try. There was definitely some positive energy there, and it was great chatting to people about Swimrun. And one of the questions I got asked a lot was, how far is it? But it's quite a broad answer that I had to give there, because it's the shortest distance is 5 kilometres. Longest in the UK, I'm talking here. The longest is actually 53 kilometres at Swimrun Jersey, the long course there. So something for everyone. But yeah, there probably will eventually be some kind of tier system of distances that's a bit more easy to explain, but I don't know. Who knows? There's so many factors. The Swimrun Championships Friendship Battle is now live. You can enter it. I'll link to the entry webpage in the show notes. I've entered already, and I've formed a team called WeSwimrun, as you'd expect. Just scroll down. If you want to join the team, just scroll down to the WeSwimrun on the drop-down list. And we will do battle as a nation. You have to be, it's a nation battle. So WeSwimrun is British. So yeah, if you are non-British, you can enter the team, but you'd have to pretend you're British. So that's fine. And yeah, I've got to go now because there's 101 things to do. I've got WX Trail half marathon and marathon at the weekend, and I'm just squeezing in some podcasting in between putting arrows out and chopping up oranges. So hopefully catch you soon.